Okay, so good morning for goldenrod's fly tying for the 10th of January 2025. I'm going to do two patterns today. The first one is called a blue Zulu, and it's ran across it on the web, and apparently history has it that at one point or another it had been banned from some of these loch style fishing competitions as being too effective. I think that's just hype, but it tends, apparently it's a fly that's used in the southern hemisphere more than here, but it's interesting, so I'll give that a go. And then the second fly is going to be one of these guys, and I'll give a little more introduction as to how I got to that one later. So the hook for this guy is basically a number 8 wet fly hook. It's a 2x long shank. This is a standard mustad one, so I'm just going to pinch the barb down and put them in the vise. So this will be a fairly quick and straightforward tie. Black 6/0 thread, or 3/0, I think this is 3/0, a fairly solid thread. And I'll just start that at the head, and I will, near the head, and I will cover the shank a bit with thread right down to the bend. Now the tail on this guy is red yarn, and this stuff here, I've got some polyester stuff. And you could use wool. So all I'm going to do with this is just measure it out the back a little bit, tie it down at the bend, and I'll give it a few good wraps right at the bend. And then I'll go underneath it, lift that tail up and go underneath it. That keeps the tail from bending down and getting wound around the hook. And I'll trim it off at about gap length behind the bend. Trim off the excess here. Hey. Now the next material is tinsel, and it for the fly pattern size, it's probably a little big for tinsel, but that's the way the pattern does with a fairly wide tinsel compared to the size of the fly. This is a size 14. You could use a size 12, but I found that to be a little bit too much tinsel. And the tinsel that I've got is two-sided. It's got a gold side and a silver side. Now with this, to make this work, I want the silver side out. So I'm going to tie it onto the hook shank with the gold side facing me, because the first wrap will turn it over, so the silver side faces out. I'm going to tie it right at the back there where the red stuff is, the tail is. And I'll just put that out of the way here in the material clip. The body is seal fur, seal dubbing. And seal dubbing is pretty coarse, and it's tough to get it to stick to the thread. So I will use dubbing wax, and I'll get some a good chunk of dubbing wax on the thread so that the seal will adhere to it. Take little bits of dubbing wax or seal dubbing and apply it in small pinches to the thread and just give it a little twist as I put it on. And I'll try to make a little rope of seal fur dubbing. And like I say, this stuff is difficult to get to actually adhere to the thread. You have to squish it on there pretty good, pinch it pretty solid. And I'm just going to do a little bit here and then get some wrapping done. So I'll get it on there with the dubbing wax, and I'll come back right to where I've started with the tinsel. And I will build a dubbed body up the shank of the hook. Don't want it too thick, but I want it enough that you have a relatively thick body, not chunky, but maybe 3 times the hook shank diameter up the shank. Getting close to the end here. And again, the trick here is don't put too much on the thread, otherwise it tends to bulk up really quickly. And it doesn't adhere to the thread very well if you put too much on. Then I'm going to stop about 2 eye widths shy of the eye of the hook. Just a little more here. All right, so there we go. Now, this is going to have a body hackle and a throat or head hackle, I guess you could call it. And to tie the hackle in, I'm going to tie it. This is a saddle hackle. Its barbules were probably a little more than gap length. And I'm going to tie it from the front end of the hackle to the back. So I'm going to take because I want it a little wider at the front of the fly than at the back. So I'm going to strip the hackle back a little bit and trim it so I've got a bare portion of hackle stem. And I'm going to tie it so that, as usual, these hackles have a bit of a curve to them. And I'm going to tie it so that the curve faces away from me, so that when faces me, so that when I wrap it, the curved hackle is going to go this way and make it a little more disturbance in the water when it's stripped. All right, now I'm going to wrap this back down the body of the fly, and a reasonable number of wraps. Then when I get to where the tail is, do a wrap there. Then I'll hold the hackle up like that, take my tinsel, and I will wrap it over top of the hackle. And then I will wiggle as I wrap this tinsel forward. I'm going to wiggle it so it doesn't trap the hackle fibers down too much. And I will do that all the way up the body of the fly as a rib. And when I get up to the front, finish it off up here. To tighten that face up. And then I will wrap over, pull it back, the tinsel back, and wrap over back. And I want to leave again that 2 eye widths in front, because that's where I'm going to attach the second hackle. And then I'll come right back in here, right down to the tinsel with the tag end of that hackle, and trim it off right behind the tinsel. There we go. So that's the body. Now, the front of the hackle, I've got these, basically they're like a, not a saddle, they're sort of a soft saddle hackle. And they have fairly long barbules. And so with this one, I want the longer barbules to be wrapped on last so that they create a little bit more length in the last few wraps than in the first few. So I'll stretch it out and I will tie it in by the tip. And I'll just pull it back, tie it in by the tip, right back to the very front of the black hackle. Come in front and just wrap in front of the tip of that. Pull it up and trim it off. And then when I do this, I'm going to do what's called fold the hackle, which means that I'm going to hold it so that the curvature of the hackle faces the back. And I'll use my fingers, wetting fingers, to stroke the hackle fibers back around the stem so that as I wrap, I'm pulling the barbules towards the back. And as you see, it's going to gradually spread out all these barbules, but they're all going to face towards the rear of the hook as I fold the hackle. And I have to, because they're fairly long barbules, I have to get them out of the way of the thread and everything as I go. And when I get to enough of them on there to make a decent hackle, I'll hold this up and wrap in behind it. And hold it all back like that and wrap in front. Then I can come in with my scissors and take out the stem. Make sure all of the fibers are pulled back and wrap a small head right behind the eye. At that point, I'll whip finish. Couple of whip finishes just to be sure. Trim it off. And then a little bit of head cement. Just to seal up the wraps on the head and give that head a little bit of a glossy appearance. And to keep from gumming up the eye, I'm going to take the little bit of this hackle and run the hackle stem through the eye of the hook. Come on, get in there. It's being ornery today. It's a very fine stem, so it's not going to go through the hole easy. Anyway, I can use my bodkin as well. Normally, I'd run that hackle stem through the eye of the hook, but it's being ornery this morning. There we go. And that's him. That's the blue Zulu. Any questions, comments? I hope I haven't muted everybody. Can't hear you. Okay, let me just. Why are we?
Oh, can you hear me?
Oh, yeah. Okay, I can hear you. Yeah. Good. Okay. I just was want to make sure the audio was working.
Yep.
Okay, so the second fly, now I got distracted when I was looking to see what fly to tie, and I was looking for something that's a little unusual. And I came across a fly by a guy by the name of Popovich, and it's a lure style fly, and it uses a body constructed of multiple layers of bucktail. And I figured that might be interesting to try, but it's one that ends up being very, the way you tie the bucktail on is makes sort of a lure type shape, and then you have to use hot water to form it. So I figured, well, I don't want to go to all that trouble. And one of the things that it needed was spooled mono in order to get this material to work right. So I thought I'd experiment with it. So what I'm going to tie for you is basically it's a bucktail pattern. And to make the body vertically nice and wide, but narrow this way, I used the techniques that this guy Popovich was using for his lure flies. And instead of, he would change the width, the height of this by shortening up individual sections, so you'd get a very curved shape. But I didn't want to go to the length of putting a whole whack of bucktail all the way down the shank of the fly. And I wanted to do it more like a Clouser Mineral style bucktail. So I'm using the technique that he used to get the body shape that you want. And instead of just putting he used a thing called tag eyes. They're big yellow eyes that have a little tab attached to them that you can wrap onto the hook shank that allows the fly to sit on the side of the fly, and then you glue it down to the bucktail. But I couldn't find those. So I'm going to use these things here, which are called fish skulls. Now, sell them at Robinson's. They come in a variety of sizes. So this is what the package looks like. 8 fish skulls. And they come in sizes. This one, smaller one here, is for size 8 to number 4 hooks. But they go all the way up to these monsters here, which are for up to 4/0. And they're little metal head that comes with a little strip of stick-on eyes. And in the head, there's a little recess that you'll see shortly that allows you to stick the eyes onto the little recess on the fish skull. And it's not particularly heavy, but it does give a little weight to the front of the fly. Now, to do this, I found some monofilament sewing thread. My wife is a quilter. I found this in the sewing shop. So it's basically a very fine monofilament. So what I'm going to do with this is I'll start it about halfway down the hook shank. I don't want to cover the hook with bucktail. So I'll start about halfway down and tie the thread on. And to give a bit of a body shape that covers the hook point, I'll turn the vise upside down. Now I'll make a spot here. I want to put the first bucktail on. Now, bucktails, I have a variety. I've got this piece here, which is a full-size bucktail, and it's got some white and some brown on it. And I also have some bucktail pieces like this that come off, probably are sold in little batches of 3 or 4. And this one is got, you look at the length of the hair, this one's got a little bit shorter hair than this one. I want the short hair to start with and then later on as well. And it comes dyed. So I've got some green stuff. got some red stuff. So that's what you're going to need to tie the bodies of these. So first I'm going to take one of the shorter bits of the bucktail, and I use small bunches, like this is maybe a 1/4 inch. I'll cut that off. Hold it by the tip and by the butt first. Then I'm going to take a couple of these really long bits of bucktail out because they are not even at the tips. Then I'll hold the tip, take my comb and get the fuzz out of the bottom. This makes it easier to tie on. I'll measure where I want it, and I want it to be basically shank length behind the shank. So I'll hold it on the hook like that and hold it with my right hand where the thread's hanging and pinch it with my left hand like that. Then I will take my scissors and cut it really close to my fingers there. I have a little more than 1/8 of an inch sticking out. And I will hold that down on top of the hook, just a little bit in front of where the thread is. Do a loose wrap or two. And let the thread hang. And then I'm going to take my fingernail and my fingers and try and wrap that butt end slightly around the shank where the thread is before I cinch it down. So that allows the bucktail to sit on the underside of the hook. Turn the thread over, turn the hook over. And I will cinch down the remaining bucktail that sticks out. Now this stuff will pull out if you're not careful. So what I'm going to do, and it'll set up, is just a little dab of super glue to make sure it's going to stay there. Wrap my thread forward to just a little bit just a little bit shy of where I tied that first bucktail in. Now I want a little longer stuff. And I'll take, again, not a huge batch of it. I'd say maybe a 3/8 of an inch clump. And I'll cut that off the bucktail. This is going to take some time because I got to go through this process of taking the real long hairs out and matching the tips up a bit and pull out the really long ones. I don't want it too fuzzy at the tail end. Once again, I'll measure the length, but before I put this all on, I'm going to take those tips and put them in my hair stacker. Down my hair stacker. Get in there. Everything's a little staticky this morning. And then I'm going to make a noise by down, back the hair. So the tips are relatively even. This ends up being a very messy proposition. I'll measure that back to at least as far as where the underside went on top of the hook. Again, hold it in my left finger, thumb and finger, and pinch it. And again, cut it really short, a little more than 1/8 of an inch in front of where my fingers are holding it. Set that down right on top of where I had the previous batch tied in. Do a loose wrap or two, and then cinch it down. Not really hard, because again, what I want to try to do is use my thumb and forefinger to work that bucktail around the sides of the shank of the hook before I cinch it really good. So you see now it's covering not just the top of the hook, it's covering around the sides and maybe even a little bit to the bottom. And I will tie that down. Again, touch of super glue. I want this stuff to stay there. Just grab it, put it on the thread and a couple of thread wraps. And I'll repeat this process with succeeding bits of bucktail. Again, I don't want to do them in too large a patch of each one, because you can't work the bucktail around the shank if it's too thick. Again, try to even up the tips a bit. Measure the length. And on the flies that Popovich was tying, he would gradually start with them in the middle way back here and then gradually shorten them as one to go to the front. But for the fly that I want it to have a longer at the top than at the bottom process. So I'll measure that again, right to where the thread's hanging, and I'll cut it. This is going to take a bit because I'm going to do a whole bunch of these. And lay that down there and wrap it in. A little bit loose to start with, and then spread it around the shank. Cinch it down. And we'll do another couple of those. And then I'm going to go to the shorter bucktail again. Again, all these little batches are relatively small. And hopefully I can get them into the hair stacker and tap them in. Try and even up the ends a bit. Measure that the same way I did the last one. And cut it down. Now, if you wanted to put a lateral line on this pattern, you could probably do that by putting another darker color of bucktail in, which I've done on one of the flies before I put the top on. So that's more like the belly of the fly. And let's just do one that's got a little bit of brown in here to give it a little bit of a contrast in the middle of all the white. Clip that out of the bucktail. Hold it by get a manageable size clump. Take the fuzz out. Put it in the stacker. That was fun. This can be a messy proposition. I have a lint roller that's going to pick up all the fluff off the carpet here when I'm done. Again, take a small batch, maybe a little less than that. Measure him a little bit shorter and cut it off at 1/8 again. Set it down on the shank. Couple of loose wraps. Work it around and cinch it down good. Getting close to the eye. I don't want to get much closer than that to the eye of the hook, because I've got to get this fish skull to fit over, and I can measure that now, to fit over the hook eye from the front. And that's about the right. I don't want to go much further than that. There'll be 2 little bits of bucktail I'm going to put on now here. So for the topping, I'm going to use the green guy here, green bucktail. And I will pull again another decent, or maybe a little bigger clump this time, out of the package. Cut it off. Hold it by the tip. Get rid of the fuzzies at the bottom with my comb. I don't mind if that's a little bit straggly at the top. And I'm going to measure it for length. Cut it short. And then once again, I'm going to put it down here like that, really tight. Okay, let's try that again. That's a little bit too far forward. Didn't cut that short enough. All right. Okay. Set that down there. That is gone haywire on me. Let's go back a step. The brown has twisted. There we go. Okay, let's try that brown stuff again. I think I might have had a little too much material in there for that. So I got a bit of brown here. That's more like it there. There, that's a lot better. Okay, that's more like it. Push that on too far forward. Okay, now back to the green. So this is the topping part, which is the green. Again, I don't want a whole pile here. It's a lot thicker where I'm tying it in. It may make it tough to get that fish skull on it. Again, measure the height, grab it there, cut it a little more than 1/8 of an inch from my edge of my fingers. That should hold it. Set him down there. Do a couple of good wraps. 1, 2, 3. That should be good. There, he's on. Now the last part I want to do before I put the skull on is I'm going to give it a little bit of a red throat to represent gills. So I have a red bucktail. I'm going to try and find the really short bits here. And I'm not going to use much. And it's going to be really short. So I'm going to take all these really long bits out of that clump. So I just have short red fibers. And I only want a teeny bit under the bottom. So let's get rid of some more of the long ones. There we go. And this once again is got to cut it really close to my fingers. Set it down on top. And this is up with the hook upside down. So I'm putting the red on just on the bottom of the whole assembly. When I've got that done, I will cinch everything down with my thread and give a really good pull with the nylon thread. That will cinch everything in, make sure everything is in place straight, and then back with the super glue. And make sure I've got everything glued in and tied down really well. And when I get that done, then I'm just going to very quick with the super glue I've got. This is going to hold this really well. Do a quick whip finish. Now comes the fish skull. And I will slide it on like so and push it back so that it is right behind where the eye of the hook is, so that I can actually get my tying thread in front of the fish skull where the back of the eye is. Get in there with the tying thread and do several good wraps. I mean, behind the eye of the hook and in front of the fish skull. That's what holds the whole fish skull on there, is those thread wraps. And I'm just going to again, I will put some super glue on here. And wrap it in. Make sure it's in there good. And then I can, that super glue will hold that. And then the last little tricky bit of this is putting the eyes on. I turn the fly sideways so that the little recess is up. And just again, dab a super glue on the little recess in the eye of the thing. Pick out the eye with my bodkin off the little plastic thingy that it's on, and carefully set it down where the recess is on this thing. And they're super glued into the recess. You can see that's there. And then I will do the same thing on the other side. By the way, this brushable super glue, I get this from Home Hardware. It's JB super glue. It's not horribly expensive. And once again, I'll take this eye off the plastic backing with my bodkin and set it down on the recess. Get on there. This is always the worst part of this thing, is trying to get that little sticky on eye in the recess. There we go. He's in. So that's him. Let's stop the highlight here if I can find out. It's been a while since I've done this, so I need to find all these things I can stop the highlight. Okay, so we should have everybody available now. So that is the fish skull fly.
How do you fish that, Dave?
You just fish it like you would any bucktail. Any bucktail fly, just a reasonable length leader. It's weighted, so it's going to have a tendency to. I would be tempted to tie on using a non-slip loop to let it move around a bit. Okay. They are like any weighted fly. You have to watch your back cast to keep your back cast higher. You wear that fly in the back of your head. Good tip. You might want to use a little stiffer leader too. So that's it for today.
Okay. Thank you very much.
And I will stop the recording. There we go.